So we'll get started. So just want to say thank you all for joining today's virtual stakeholder session. The purpose of the stakeholder session is to gather input from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on potential priority actions to address climate change emissions within the halogenated gases sector. My name is Ashlyn Spector, and I'm with the Rutgers University Blaustein School of Planning and Policy, and I'm working with the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center. The New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center at Rutgers University is working with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to gather input from stakeholders on several sectors. The Resource Center was established by law 3 years ago, and it provides support and services throughout New Jersey on actions to address climate change here in the Garden State. Jean is typing in, or has just typed, the website address for the Resource Center into the chat box. So before we get started, I wanted to mention some important housekeeping items for today. So first off, there is a simultaneous Spanish translation being provided for this webinar. And if you'd like to join the simultaneous Spanish translation, you need to go to the bottom of your screen and click on the globe icon to select Spanish. And I'm going to pause for just a minute to let any of you who want to join the interpretation portion of the webinar to switch over. Okay. So hopefully those of you who needed to have switched over to that. A second housekeeping topic I want to address is that several of you have expressed interest in using closed captions as part of the webinar. Matt, can I please ask you how to explain to use closed captioning for the webinar?
Yes, at the bottom next to the interpretation button, there's a show captions with a CC logo. Just click on that and your closed captioning will begin.
Great, thank you. The third housekeeping topic I want to mention is that the webinar is being recorded. And the recording, along with NJDEP's PowerPoint presentation from today, that will all get posted to DEP's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, which Jean is going to chat the link to, or put the link to that website in the chat box. So today we're going to be asking for your input in 2 ways. First, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and we will call on you and unmute you so you can ask your question or offer a comment. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak and offer their question or comment. So please be straightforward and efficient with providing any of those. We will also be using the chat box today. So if you put a comment or question in the chat, Jean will be reading it out loud so our Spanish interpreters can interpret it. We'll be also using the chat box to put in links to different websites that we think will be useful to you. And to access the chat box, you're going to scroll down to the bottom of your screen and click chat. Just make sure that when you are typing into the chat that you select to everyone. Sometimes that might pop up host and panelist, but you want to put to everyone so that your communication is captured in the transcript of the meeting. And if you're asking a very long question or putting something in there, it may be longer than the character count the chat box can handle. So you can always raise your hand and we will unmute you if you'd like to speak. If anyone participating today is asking a question in Spanish, please raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question in Spanish and our interpreter will translate it into English. So now that we have covered our housekeeping items, let's begin our discussion. The Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG, program is a national 2-phase program funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. In phase one, there's non-competitive planning grants are provided by the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to states, local governments, tribes, and territories to develop and implement climate action plans. So the state of New Jersey has received $3 million grants from EPA to update and enhance the state's existing climate action plans. The first product that will be generated is a priority climate action plan, referred to as a PCAP, which is due to EPA in March of 2024. So the PCAP will be highly focused, a near-term list of measures that can be implemented quickly to help the state achieve its 2030 goal of a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The PCAP will inform New Jersey's application for implementation funds under phase 2 of the national program, in which $4.6 billion will be available in competitive grants to carry out greenhouse gas reduction measures proposed in the PCAP. The PCAP will focus on 6 priority areas. These are transportation, buildings, electric generation, food waste, halogenated gases, and natural working lands. So today, obviously, we're going over halogenated gases. Our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. In a minute or two, I will turn things over to the team from NJDEP, who will give a presentation of approximately 20 to 30 minutes on potential priority climate actions for the halogenated gases sector that are under consideration for inclusion within the PCAP. We will then open it up for all of you to ask any clarification questions on the DEP presentation, and we'll do that for about 10 minutes. From there, we will launch into a discussion for approximately an hour about your thoughts on potential priority climate actions related to halogenated gases that I will facilitate. Following that discussion, we will turn it back over to NJDEP to give a quick update on next steps associated with the agency's effort on this program. And then we're going to turn it back over to you to see if there should be any additional topics related to halogenated gases that you want to raise. We also really want to stress that you can continue to give input on topics related to halogenated gases and priority climate actions after today by visiting the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, where there is an option for you to submit comments online. The chat notifications come and go, so maybe Jean already put the link in the chat, but if she hasn't, she will be including the link.
Just done, Ashlyn.
All right, great. So now I'd like to turn it over to Doug Benton of the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Doug is a research scientist in the NJDEP Bureau of Climate Change and Clean Energy, and is helping to lead the development of the state's climate pollution reduction grant program. Doug is joined by several other members of the NJDEP team who are here to listen to your comments and respond to your questions. So take it away, Doug.
Thanks, Ashlyn. Thanks you everyone for joining us this morning, and thank you, Ashlyn, for starting us off. I'm just going to take a little bit of a further dive into the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, give a little overview of the state's timeline for development of the PCAP, and then introduce first, real quick, my co-presenter, who will present a little bit more about the emissions reduction goals and efforts for New Jersey's halogenated gases sector. So I'm Doug Benton. I'm a research scientist in the Bureau of Climate Change and Clean Energy. I'm joined here today by my co-presenter, Mala Saro, who is the DEP Bureau of Climate Change and Clean Energy research scientist as well. And like I said, I'm going to start off by giving an overview of the CPRG program, and Mala is going to take a deeper dive into the halogenated gases sector. So what is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, also referred to as CPRG? It is a nationwide 2-phase EPA grant funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, which many have referred to as the IRA. This is a 2-phase grant program. Like I said, the first phase is already underway. It provided non-competitive planning grants to states and local governments to develop a series of climate action plans focused on mitigating greenhouse gases. The second phase of the program is a $4.6 billion competitive grant, which is launched in September. And EPA released its notice of funding availability for the competitive grants on their website in September, and that's available to view now. Through that second phase of the program, the funds will be dedicated to implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction measures. So in phase 1 of the CPRG program, due to New Jersey's population density, we were fortunate enough to have received 4 discrete planning grants covering portions of our state. The New Jersey DEP received a grant to develop statewide plans, outlined in blue here on the map. The New York City Economic Development Corporation, in partnership with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, received a planning grant covering 12 counties in New Jersey, stretching from Sussex to Ocean. That's shown in pink on the map. And then the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission in Pennsylvania received a grant that covers a portion of Warren County, which is shown in yellow on the map. And finally, the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission received a planning grant that covers portions of 5 counties in New Jersey, shown in green on the map. So each of these entities will be producing climate action plans for their respective areas in New Jersey as part of the CPRG program deliverables to the EPA. So needless to say, there's going to be a need for coordination between and across each of these entities while they're making these plans. So we want to avoid stakeholder fatigue as much as possible. And in an effort to do so, if you are a municipality or county or another entity located in these areas covered by both the state grant and one of the regional planning grant entities, we encourage you to get involved in the planning efforts for both of those PCAPs. We intend to use our New Jersey State CPRG webpage, which was shared in the chat, I believe, several times, to co-promote stakeholder meetings and events across the state during this process. So phase 1 of the planning grant requires the development of 3 separate deliverables over the next 4 years. The first deliverable is a priority climate action plan referred to as a PCAP, which is due on March 1st of 2024 to the EPA. As per EPA guidance, the PCAP is meant to focus on near-term implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction measures. It's important to also note that an entity can only apply for implementation grant funding as part of that phase 2 for measures that are included in a PCAP. So this PCAP and the development of the PCAP, potential implementation grant funding measures that are included in the PCAP is what our focus of our discussion will be today, specifically with regards to the halogenated gases sector and measures in that sector. The second deliverable is the comprehensive climate action plan. So looking down the road, that is due in mid-2025. We're also referring to this as a CCAP. This will touch on all sectors and significant sources and sinks of greenhouse gases in the state of New Jersey, and we'll be using that to update the state's 80 by 50 report. And finally, in 2027, a status report is due. This is the last deliverable. and it's essentially a progress report to the EPA on intended next steps and additional financial and staffing needs related to the CPRG. So in this priority climate action plan, the EPA is requiring 4 major elements to be included. These are shown on the left side of the slide in dark blue. The first item, the greenhouse gas inventory, New Jersey will rely on our existing methodology that we use to produce our inventories already. And we plan to include the 2021 inventory in the PCAP. Similar to the 80 by 50 report, for a second item, we will work to quantify the expected emissions impacts of discrete measures included that we choose to include in the PCAP. And then for the third item, we plan to include a robust qualitative narrative about co-benefits realized in low-income and disadvantaged communities from implementation of the measures. And we intend to identify co-benefits such as improvements to public health, resilience, decreased energy costs, and community beautification. We're also going to highlight any implementation challenges to moving forward with these measures. And this is kind of one of the things that we want to start to hear from stakeholders. So what barriers to implementation exist for the given measures that we discuss. Additionally, there are a series of encouraged items that EPA is looking for in the PCAP. New Jersey intends to include at least 4 of these encouraged items. They're shown on the slide on the right-hand side of the slide in lighter blue. These include emissions projections, clear greenhouse gas reduction targets by sector, a robust plan to leverage federal funds, and a workforce planning analysis. As Ashlyn highlighted before, the New Jersey's Priority Climate Action Plan will focus on 6 priority sectors, mainly focusing on the big 3 sectors of transportation, buildings, and electric generation, which is where the bulk of emissions come from in New Jersey. But we will also be focusing on the organic waste sector, halogenated gases, and our natural working lands sector, which serves as carbon sinks to help offset the state's emissions. Today, we're here to discuss the priorities and opportunities that exist in the halogenated gases sector. We've scheduled and held other stakeholder listening sessions for these several other sectors. You can look at recordings of those sessions, as well as register for upcoming sessions on our website. So to give a little bit more background on phase 2 of the CPRG program, the implementation grants, there is lots of money available for funding. There's competitively $4.6 billion. So who can apply for funding? The EPA has outlined that there are 2 conditions for which entities can be eligible to apply. One, you can be one of the entities that have received a phase 1 planning grant. So that's all of the entities in New Jersey that were highlighted on my previous slide with the map. And then second, you could be an eligible entity, which is any of the entities listed as eligible applicants here on the slide. So in New Jersey, this is mainly MSAs, counties, and municipalities. So who are applying to implement measures included in an applicable PCAP. And by applicable PCAP, we just mean that one of the priority climate action plans that's covering the geographic region in which that county or municipality is in. So for example, if New Jersey DEP's PCAP includes school bus electrification as a PCAP measure, then municipalities and counties throughout the state can apply for funding to electrify their school bus fleets because that measure is included in a PCAP. So other sort of rules that the EPA has outlined related to the implementation grant funding. They've stated that eligible entities can only submit at most 2 lead applications. So they can submit an application as an individual or as the lead of a coalition. But eligible entities could be a partner on numerous coalition applications. So other rules, the EPA has said that they're not going to award funding to implement the same measures in the same location. So emphasis again on the coordination between these entities that are applying. And then coalitions cannot submit multiple applications for the same greenhouse gas reduction measures using different lead applicants. And the applications are going to be evaluated by the EPA as a whole, and are not going to be assessed by individual greenhouse gas reduction measures. So real quick, just an overview of these key deadlines for the CPRG. The green deadlines shown here are deadlines related to the implementation grant, and the blue deadlines are those that are related to the planning grant. And then finally, for the PCAP itself, the statewide PCAP that we're developing, this is an overview timeline of what we've done so far and what we plan to do. Right now, you can see we're in this green area of the timeline where we're holding a series of stakeholder events to gather input on the PCAP, and we intend to release a draft PCAP framework in January for public comment, with the intention to then submit the final PCAP by the deadline in March. And finally, just a plug for some of our upcoming stakeholder events related to the CPRG. We have 2 more sector sessions scheduled. So you can register for the buildings and electric generations workshop, as well as the transportation workshop on our website. We'll also update our website with any additional stakeholder events or sessions that we schedule. You can also submit a written comment or question to us using a comment form that's on that site. You can detail for us what the topic of your comment is, and it allows you to write a quite larger comment if needed than the chat poses here. So definitely encourage folks who are interested in submitting a longer comment to do that for us there. We would like to receive those comments by December 4th in order to have priority consideration for inclusion in the state's draft PCAP. So try to get those in within the next several weeks. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mala, who will take us on a deeper dive into our halogenated gases sector emissions and goals in New Jersey. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug, and it's a great overview of the CPRG program, including the Phase 1 non-competitive planning grants, as well as the Phase 2 competitive implementation grants. As Doug said, I'll be discussing our DEP approach to the CPRG planning grant deliverables and do a deep dive specifically into the priority climate action plan as it pertains to halogenated gases. Next slide. Yeah. And so where are halogenated gases located? Just to make this real for folks who are not so much involved with this day to day, hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, and other halogenated gases are found in each of the locations listed here. These are synthetic gases, in some cases referred to as refrigerants, as they're used in refrigerators, the AC unit and heat pumps, and dehumidifiers, as well as vehicle air conditioning. And they also serve in a couple of different capacities, such as foam, such as in roofing, insulation, as well as the active ingredient in fire extinguishers to put out fires at businesses or elsewhere. And so HFCs are basically a subset of halogenated gases, which also include older chemicals such as CFCs, which were considered ozone depleting substances. For those of you familiar with the stratospheric, the high altitude ozone hole. Next slide, please. In terms of business and industrial uses, which is where we focus regulations and laws in New Jersey with regard to these halogenated gases, this is an example of a compressor rack at a grocery store in New Jersey. It consists of multiple compressors piped together, connected to multiple refrigeration cases in the store. Next slide, please. And here's an example in that same store of equipment for leak detection and monitoring of refrigerants, which is really important to both reduce monetary losses from leakage as well as environmental impacts from these refrigerants, which have a very high impact on our climate. Next slide. And here you see emissions rates in the third column, annual leakage rate. Then these can be substantial when you consider the charge range in the fourth column, referring to how much refrigerant is used in the different types of equipment listed. Next slide. This should be a very familiar picture to everyone. A supermarket refrigeration case. This is one of the most common ways we see refrigerants and halogenated gases used today. There are currently 405 supermarkets and grocery stores, not including convenience stores, in our NJDEP reporting system as having large refrigeration systems using 50 pounds or more of these high climate impacting halogenetic gases such as HFCs, CFCs, and the like. Next slide. Same supermarket. This is an example of a rooftop system. And there are total of 1,673 separate large refrigeration systems at the 405 supermarkets and grocery stores registered in the state. And so this is a component of one of those grocery stores' refrigeration systems. Next slide. And another angle of it, probably some condenser coils here. Next slide. And R22 is the most common refrigerant in usage. To put it in context, its global warming potential is over 1,800 times the potency of carbon dioxide, which is considered our baseline. And it really has a very outsized impact on the climate. But it also, R22 is also an ozone depleting substance in terms of that high atmospheric ozone hole I mentioned. And it is being replaced in large part by R404A, which is the most common refrigerant in use at facilities with large refrigeration systems in New Jersey. And its climate impact is even more, being twice that of R22 and more than 3,900 times CO2. Next slide. With all of these uses of halogenated gases such as HFCs, their usage poses a real concern for climate change. As mentioned, if you look at the numbers here, we see that halogenated gas emissions in New Jersey, such as from leakage or charging up of equipment or transferring the refrigerants into storage. Whatchamacallit, they totaled approximately 5.1 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, the CO2e, under goals in the table in 2018. And so you see on the left in the pie chart that refrigeration made up the largest proportion of CO2 equivalent emissions from halogenated gases in 2018. And we have these priority reduction pathways that to help bring down the emissions from refrigerant usage in terms of both phasing out certain uses of some of these really high global warming potential, or GWP refrigerants, to ones with lower impact, and also trying to reduce things such as the leakage I mentioned, and keep related equipment in better repair. Next slide. If we don't start to phase down these high global warming potential refrigerants and other halogenated gases, we expect to see a very sharp increase, as there's been a large growth in HFC usage, as they have replaced the earlier ozone depleting substances. So there's a lot we need to do. Next slide. So the effort has really been focusing at the state and federal, especially the federal EPA level, at transitioning from the current refrigerants you see on the left, the HFCs as well as the CFCs and more, to the so-called next generation refrigerants, ones with comparable uses but much lower impacts on climate change. Next slide. On the left, you see some data we have analyzed from the first quarter of emissions report, well, not emissions reports, just overall reports of halogenated HFC gas usage by the facilities in New Jersey. And you see that, as mentioned earlier, R404A is the top in terms of the count of facilities using it. And then the other ones, the 407A, et cetera. Of these 6 gases, their global warming potential in terms of equivalency to carbon dioxide range from 1,400 times CO2 to as much as almost 3,800 or 4,000 times CO2. It's pretty bad. And in the map, you see the locations of the registered facilities in New Jersey with large refrigeration systems using high global warming potential refrigerants. Currently, the DEP has 884 registered facilities in our system under our greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting rule. Next slide. So we have a couple of existing programs. I mentioned earlier briefly 2 of these. The 2019 law addresses allowable and limited allowable uses as well as limited uses and unallowable uses of HFC and other halogenated gases in various equipment for various purposes, such as propellants, solvents, refrigeration system equipment, vending machines, and foam blowing agents such as polyurethane, the rigid one. And so the law also includes some limitations and uses of other replacement refrigerants such as propane. And the GHG-MRR, the Greenhouse Gas Monitoring and Reporting Rule, is focused on facilities, as I started to talk about earlier, those with a refrigeration system or chillers requiring 50 pounds or more of a high global warming potential refrigerant, they are required to register their facility with the DEP, keep records of their refrigerant use, and report that information to the DEP. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples of ways that we can reduce the impact of halogenated gases and particularly HFCs in current uses such as refrigeration. And we talk about here incentive programs, some efforts around building codes, and efforts to reduce leakage and such in refrigerant management programs. There are examples from other states on some of these, such as in Massachusetts, New York, and California. And we welcome your input into these and other ways that we can reduce the impact from high global warming potential halogenated gases, and ideas you may have are welcome in the chat as well as in the discussion shortly. Next slide. So that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mala. So I think now we take some first general questions related to the CPRG planning grant and implementation grant, sort of that background overview about the CPRG program. And then I think launch into discussion questions led by Rutgers. So.
And this is just a reminder, this is Jean Herb, I'm monitoring the chat, that you can either put questions in the chat and we'll read them, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Are there any clarification questions about what Doug and Mala just presented from NJDEP? Doug and Mala, you must have done a great job.
I guess so.
The question is, where is the money? That should be one question.
All right then.
Okay. Ashlyn, you there is a question in the chat from Katya Sebastian, and just so you know, we're reading the chat questions so that our Spanish interpreters can translate them. So Katya asks, there is another way to replace the insulation system. Katya, I'm not quite sure where you're going with your question. Are you asking whether this program would provide funding for other ways to replace insulation systems? And you're welcome to raise your hand and we can take you off mute if you'd rather do that than use the chat. AJ Van Kare is asking if there will be any preferences to small or women-owned businesses and out-of-state or in-state companies as part of the grant program.
I guess I could speak a little bit to the two parts of it. So we definitely encourage you to submit like a comment of how you would want the state to potentially, preference folks in any potential program that would be created through this grant. Additionally, the implementation grants that the EPA has for CPRG, their notice of funding availability outlines pretty specifically the criteria how they're going to score applications. And the kind of the main two things that you could see they're looking at is what level of emissions reductions are achieved from those near implementation measures. And then two, there's a whole piece of the scoring criteria of how it impacts low income and disadvantaged communities. And so applications will receive more points if they're hitting on those things and incorporating that. It's definitely a criteria, and it, you know, based on the the New Jersey's EJ law, and our previous investments, New Jersey's interested in pursuing ways to incorporate the comments and make sure the benefits are benefiting New Jersey's overburdened communities. So, and I know, Mala, maybe you have some information or anything you want to maybe add here about some of the data related to like refrigeration systems in EJ. I'm not sure if we've done full analysis there yet.
Thanks, Doug. Right. So, no, those are all good points you mentioned. As far as the EJ analysis, we've only, just been analyzing the data from the last quarter of 2022 that we have from the about 884 facilities in New Jersey that are so far reporting use of, having large refrigeration systems using high GWP, global warming potential refrigerants. In terms of EJ communities, we know that there are a lot around the state that overlap with where the facilities are located. We don't yet know, and won't for until next late spring or summer, what the emissions of halogenated gases are from those facilities, but we do know that there's a high concentration, as I said, of the facilities in environmental justice communities, especially in areas in northeastern New Jersey, and areas such as Piscataway and Franklin Township and some other parts. But anyhow, yes, we definitely welcome your comments and suggestions in terms of how we might design our potential future HFC incentive program to help businesses switch to lower global warming potential refrigerants. So
And
yeah.
and this is Jean in the chat again. So before I read out Katya's clarification on Katya's question, I'll just also reiterate something that Ashlyn said at the start, is that now's a chance for you to just ask for clarification questions about the presentation that DEP gave. And then in a couple minutes, what we're going to do is really launch into some topic areas where DEP would really like your input. So this webinar is intended to answer your questions, but it's also really intended to try to get your feedback. So on that question that AJ asked about preferences for small women-owned businesses, that would be, as Doug is saying, a great opportunity for you, either on this webinar, in the chat, or by raising your hand, or by submitting a comment through the portal, telling us what you think about that in terms of that topic of preferences for certain types of businesses. So with that, let me just read out Katya's clarification regarding the question about replacing insulation systems. And so what Katya says is that the meaning is to whether, I think what's here is whether replacing and changing the insulation system and not using systems that produce halogenated gases, whether that's would be something that is a eligible technology for use as part of this program. And I'm assuming that anything that involves what I think of this as a sort of a material substitution to reduce halogenated gases is going to be eligible, would be my guess.
Right. Thanks, Jean, and thanks, Katya, for your clarification in the chat. So I'll say this much. Again, we welcome your suggestion. We have not been thinking that much about insulation in terms of a New Jersey program, but we'll take that as a comment. In terms of what we've been focused on so far has been more on the refrigeration side. But as you saw in the beginning slide of my section of the deep dive in this presentation, we were talking about foam insulation and that some of that polyurethane and stuff and products like it, some of the polyurethanes and other foams use halogenated gases. So we'll definitely take that as a comment, as something to for us to think about in terms of a program that might focus more on that. Also, it's important to note the existing New Jersey adoption of the EPA so-called SNAP significant, oh, of course, I'm the blank on how to spell it out now on the call. There's alternatives for some of the halogenated gases and high impact global warming potential chemicals in terms of, well, in relation to the ozone depleting substances as well, which some of the earlier refrigerants and halogenated gases had a bigger ozone impact.
And Mala, it's I just Googled, it's the significant new alternatives policy at EPA.
Yeah,
And
new,
I'll put that in the I'll put that in the chat as well.
On the spot, I forget things.
No worries.
Thanks. But right, so all that just to say that New Jersey has a program, a law in place that requires certain uses of halogenated gases to be phased out. So we can try to put that in the chat or send that info later, but in terms of the SNAP program in New Jersey, that might pertain to Katya, your situation, and something to be aware of if you're not already, some of our efforts to phase out certain types of foam.
Thank you.
Are we?
Yeah, Ashlyn, I don't see any other questions in the chat or any raised hands right now.
Okay. Oh, I see response from Okay, great. So what we can do is we appreciate all the initial questions and comments for the program, but we're going to shift into very specific questions that we want to hear answers from you on. So I'm going to read out loud each question, and Jean is going to, or one of us will put that into the chat just so it's also written. And again, you can please respond by typing out your response. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can speak. So our first question is, NJDEP is especially interested in hearing from you all on two possible initiatives. So we're going to talk about the first one, which is the low GWP refrigerant incentive program. So what challenges and cost do businesses and industries expect to face in transitioning equipment to lower global warming potential, so GWP, refrigerants such as the natural refrigerants or A2Ls? And I can put that into the chat because that is that's a lot going on. Oh, got that. All right, great.
So again, you can put in comments in the chat or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you in terms of this question that we put into the chat, again, about one of the two program areas DEP is especially interested in regarding a low GWP refrigerant program.
I guess a sort of addendum to the question might be, have any of your businesses or organizations considered switching to lower global warming potential refrigerants? Is it something you've thought about yet?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mola. I suppose another add-on question, Mala, is what would it take? What kind of incentive would it take for a business to be able to make this transition?
Yeah.
Any suggestions, any thoughts on this?
Oh, let's see. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to speak, if you prefer that over putting anything into the chat as well.
I'm also wondering if we should do a quick poll of who's here with us. If is that something we could maybe add to the chat if people want to say where they're from or who?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm Malo with the DEP.
Okay, we've got some folks replying.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. We see that Dawn's with Sustainable Maple Shade. We see that Robin Sudam, hi Robin, is with the Environmental Commission in Franklin Township in Somerset County. Mike Davis, SRI International, is the facilities director. Thank you. We've got kind of a mix.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and Robin's asking that there was a mention about Franklin Township. In what context was that, Molly? Is that something you can add to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Robin. So I was mentioning Franklin Township as one of the municipalities or townships that in our initial analyses of those New Jersey facilities reporting to us under our greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting rule, those with large refrigeration systems seem to be somewhat of a higher concentration in terms of just the sheer number of facilities in overburdened communities or environmental justice communities in Franklin, in an area of Franklin Township. We did a bit of analysis on how many of these facilities with large refrigeration systems using high global warming potential refrigerants were located around the state in comparison to the environmental justice overburdened communities. You're welcome.
Okay, maybe move on to our next question, Ashlyn.
Yeah, so still sticking with the low GWP refrigerant incentive program. Actually, we might have already added that. This is another shout out if there are what incentives would you suggest DEP provides to encourage retrofits and replacements of refrigeration and chiller equipment to lower these GWP refrigerants. So again, asking about any incentives that you all would like to see or think would be really useful that DEP can provide to you to encourage the replacement of refrigeration and chiller equipment.
Now we're talking about where's the money. Everybody should be chiming in.
Well, I think also, Mala, sort of an issue here is also understanding if there have been incentives offered previously that worked or didn't work, I guess, and whether the stakeholders have any particular thoughts as to how, not just what the incentives are, but how they can best be offered.
Right. No, that's a great point.
You know, so for example, like whether that's through partnerships with business associations and things like that.
Right, especially for those of you with townships and environmental commissions, you know, partnerships with the commercial, industrial, you know, sector. We don't currently have an incentive program in place at all in New Jersey around refrigerants or other uses of halogenated gases. Other states have had them. We've been, you know, checking out ones in Massachusetts and elsewhere. Also, we might have a pilot program from another state agency focused more on buildings and the uses of refrigerants for cooling spaces, like in air conditioning and stuff. But yes, we would definitely welcome your thoughts on ways maybe to incentivize, or how you would think that your company or township might like to see an incentive program rolled out. Or if you need more information, if you have just some baseline questions about, I can talk more about what other incentive programs have looked at.
Well, and Mala, it's Jean again. I know that DEP has hosted several conversations with municipalities through a partnership with Sustainable Jersey. I'm wondering if any issues came up there with regard to the types of incentives that municipalities might have an interest in, who that might have come from, like the Sustainable Jersey Green teams.
Yeah, it's a good point. Doug? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd sat in on those calls, and I would say the majority of the focus in a lot of municipalities in New Jersey is on building decarbonization and transportation electrification, and low carbon transportation methods, reducing vehicle miles traveled, which are major sources of emissions in New Jersey. We know. There was definitely less of a discussion about refrigerants, and refrigerant replacements and HFCs and halogenated gases, and maybe that is it tells us something about how and plugged into this discussion or this issue of HFCs local governments are, or where it falls in terms of priority for emissions reductions. But we definitely would like to hear, those folks on the call who are, from a municipality, New Jersey, if this is maybe newer information to you, or what maybe just some general reactions to this information.
And also, it's a great point you raised, Doug. And, just in terms of overall reactions, just to throw into people's thought process as they're formulating their answer to that question, just keep in mind that, these halogenated gases that are really used everywhere. I talked about all the commercial and business uses, but they're used all around our homes too, and our buildings for cooling, for chillers, for other purposes. And so I mentioned during my portion of the slides that the refrigerants currently in use in New Jersey in the large facilities, have an impact of anywhere from about 1,400 to 4,000 times that of carbon dioxide. This is an urgent issue. This isn't something, this is something we all need to get our heads around. It's technical. It's dealing with equipment most of us don't look at, except when it's not working or something, or we need to call in a contractor or whatever, but it has a huge impact on our climate. So we definitely welcome your reactions.
So we have a comment in the chat. Hang on, my chat's just a tiny bit slow. From Dawn Byrne, who's saying that Dawn didn't realize how large the impact of refrigeration is and didn't really consider it an issue, probably because Dawn's not a business owner. And in all honesty, Dawn, until we were preparing for this webinar, I hadn't really wrapped my head around the potential impactful role that municipalities can play on this topic. I always just thought of it as a business issue. So I'm really with you too in terms of understanding this, which might mean translating part of your comment into the need for education, perhaps as part of the CPRG program. Thank you.
Would it maybe make sense if since we have a similar suite of questions for the other proposed program, that we ask that, and maybe that kind of,
Let's do it.
yeah, let's jump to that. So we asked about the low GWP refrigerant incentive program, but we're going to jump to the refrigerant management program. So similar question to before, but what challenges and cost do you all encounter in conducting safe recycling and disposal of the refrigeration and chiller and other equipment that contain refrigerants? So what are the challenges you see? What are the money and cost associated with recycling and getting rid of all of these types of equipment? And then also, you know, what would you suggest? What do you want to see that's going to help you safely dispose and recycle these equipment? Is that money? Is that what resources is that? What do you need to accomplish this?
Thanks, Ashlyn. And that includes too, you know, even just tracking. Like if you don't even know that you're having an issue with refrigerant leakage, maybe it just makes sense to start with having some equipment to track emissions or track leakage. That we welcome you to weigh in on that too, if you just need to get started with collecting some data.
Mala, is something like purchase or lease of that kind of tracking equipment something that could be an eligible cost under the EPA grant program?
Or a DEP program, you mean?
Yeah, yes, right.
Right. I mean, that's something we would certainly welcome your input on. Sure, that you know, we saw in the pictures. I don't know, Doug, do you have access to bring up the slides again quickly?
Sure,
If
yeah.
not,
If
I
you want
can.
me to show those photos again, I can bring
Yeah,
this up.
yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Get back to the slides. Was
Sure.
there a particular picture you wanted to bring up first?
Um,
Bring up?
the one with the panel with the
Okay.
leakage detection, that kind of thing. Appreciate it.
So
Right. So yeah, there's definitely room for that kind of thing. And again, whether at a business level or could be a municipality, maybe you have a number of buildings, maybe you maybe there are hospitals with a lot of refrigeration for medicines, or I hate to say it to be morbid, but the morgue might be using a lot. So right. Right here. Thanks, Doug. Yeah. So here you see in terms of some of the higher sources of leakage and how some of the, I mean, if you think 15 or 25%, wow, even for mobile air conditioners, 10 to 20% leakage. What?
That is amazing.
It's crazy. And you think even on the lower end, some of these refrigerants might have 1,400 times that of carbon dioxide. What? Doug, can you switch to the picture?
sure.
There was one from the grocery, all those pictures like this that had some leaked equipment. Something.
Oh,
Keep going.
was it the rooftop ones or the?
No, there was one that was like a panel. It's, I think the titles said that it was.
Might be here.
There it is. Yeah. Right. So to your point, Jean, right. I don't see why not, in terms of why we couldn't consider helping to incentivize some of this, you know, equipment to help people just track and get a handle on what kind of leaks are taking place. It doesn't take a lot for it to have a big impact on the climate.
A follow-up question maybe, because this is more directly asking for money support, is who should be responsible for the cost associated with recycling or reclamation, and what do you see as, you know, possible funding sources for this? Should refrigerant manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, or others be required to participate in an extended producer responsibility or product stewardship program? So who do you see as being responsible for the cost of these things to carry that out?
Ashlyn, I think we can move on to other questions.
Okay. All right. Do we want to leave the PowerPoint up or?
I think not for now.
Okay. Great. So DEP is also interested in stakeholders' insights on workforce development programs associated with halogenated gases. And so what do you see as the most pressing workforce challenges in achieving and implementing the priority actions that have been outlined? And if you were hiring people to work to implement these actions, or within your industry in general, working with halogenated gases or the equipment or anything in one of your facilities, what are the job types and skill sets that you would need to see if you wanted to hire someone to carry these out? So has it been, you know, really easy to find when you are trying to hire a new employee? Do you have a lot of people, you know, within that applicant pool that all sound great? Are you struggling to find people who are qualified? You know, what does that look like, and what are the qualifications that you do look for?
To put this in a bit more context, and thanks, Ashlyn, for all those clarifications and info. You know, as the transition has been taking place from the higher global warming potential refrigerants to lower impact ones, EPA, as you know, in conjunction with EPA's program, they have American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, AIM Act, which is phasing out a number of high global warming impact halogenated gases and HFCs. So as that takes place, we understand from other groups like NASRC, North American Sustainable Refrigeration Council, that there's a real workforce shortage for doing these kinds of things. Just that.
Just a reminder that you can both, you know, put any responses, or even if you have a question to ask for further clarification, comment, into the chat box. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can ask or say a comment yourself.
Thanks, Ashlyn. I don't see any activity in the chat now, so I think we can move on.
Okay. So another question that falls into the same vein related to workforce is within underserved communities, what are the challenges in recruiting individuals from these communities to work within the industry or sector related to anything to halogenated gases? These challenges in recruiting individuals, they might be services such as finding childcare, transportation access, anything else. So what do you see of any challenges in recruiting folks?
And these are typically referred to as wraparound services. What kinds of additional services would employers need to be able to provide?
Any thoughts from employers or anyone that might be a part or represent these groups or have any insight? If we
Ashlyn, I think you can move on to the questions about benefits, and then we can open it up to see if there are other things on the minds of the attendees today.
Sure, yeah. So moving on to next set of questions, what are the potential benefits that these actions could bring to low income and disadvantaged communities? For example, benefits could include improved public health, increased resilience to climate change, decreased energy cost, creation of workforce development opportunities.
And the reason that we're asking this question in particular is because as part of the NJDEP's submittal of the Priority Climate Action Plan to US EPA, they do need to be able to document what they expect some of the benefits from what they're proposing as part of their program to be. So we want to hear from stakeholders as to where you might see benefits to lower income and disadvantaged communities in the state. And then, Ashlyn, we can pause for a minute and then we can just open it up to see if there's questions or overall comments from attendees.
Yeah. So again, if you showed up today, what information were you hoping to get, or what questions did you have? What compelled you to want to be here? Is that because you wanted to learn more about funding? You had questions about that? There are resources here, and we're open to hearing you and your comments and feedback and questions.
So again, for those of you who are joining us here today, are there topics that you want to cover that we have not covered, or areas of questions that you would like to hear from DEP as to the direction of the program?
We do have one chat message from Dawn Jean.
Yeah, I saw that Dawn, I'm with you. Dawn says that a priority is to educate themselves as to what halogenated gases are and their impact on the environment. And I do think, Dawn, that we can take your comments, but some other things that we've heard as to the importance of education on this particular topic. It's a little bit of a sleeper topic, I think, in New Jersey's work on climate change, that we need to really draw more attention to the contribution. Thank you.
Right. I mean, especially, I guess, for folks you don't see the halogenated gases. I mean, there's equipment, but you don't actually see the gases. The same with air quality in general. It's like not as tangible. Unless you see like a big cloud or poof where you smell something bad. But the halogenated gases, as well as all different refrigerants, can have effects on workers who are right there up close, filling up equipment, maintaining equipment and stuff like that. So there are some health effects, especially for workers. Some of the chemicals can be pretty noxious.
So Ashlyn, I think I would maybe turn it over to DP now to just talk through next steps in terms of this process.
Yeah. All right. So we'll wrap up these facilitated questions, and yeah, I'll throw it over to DEP team to talk about what comes next.
Thanks, Ashlyn. Thanks, Jean. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time this morning to learn about the New Jersey's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program and the state's approach to writing this priority climate action plan, and to learn about halogenated gases. I did drop in the chat one potential good place to start. It's our website. We have an overview of all greenhouse gases in general, and there's a sub tab on there about fluorinated gases, which is a lot of these halogenated gases. And there are additional resources that you can find through our website. I will also drop in the chat again our a little thank you, as well as a link to our CPRG webpage, where we have both a comment form. So if you have, think of additional question you want to ask about this topic, submit it to us there. We definitely would love to hear more from you all. And then if you would like to register for another workshop that we have in a different sector, a different workshop coming up for the CPRG, that would be the place to do that. Another thing I'll say is, if you attended today and this was informational and helpful or interesting, and other folks in your industry or in your community that would be interested in this, please share the recording that you get from this webinar, or the link that we'll have on our webpage and our webpage itself to those folks, so we get the information in the right people's hands, so we can get some good feedback and comments from you all to help shape this plan. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all for taking time. I'll send it back to Ashlyn for any last pieces of info.
Yeah, thank you all. Had some great reminders. So as we said at the top of the webinar, the recording for today and the presentation by NJDEP, this will all be listed on the NJDEP Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program website, which has been thrown into the chat. You can also find a schedule for additional stakeholder webinars on other topics, as well as the form to submit additional comments, also within these website links. So thank you again on behalf of NJDEP and New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center for joining us today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.